As I said, we're going to look at single use, how it's allowed industry to evolve. I'd like to ask actually both Scott and David, first of all, if you could kind of give us a brief synopsis or history about how ILC Dover and Lonza respectively first kind of entered the single-use biomanufacturing space. Scott, if you'd like to start.
Right, we entered the biomanufacturing space actually developing a really novel and patented single-use bioreactor that didn't really go anywhere. So back in 2002, 2003, we just couldn't get any traction, although the Flex Mixer was a fantastic bioreactor, and we sort of abandoned the biofarm and altogether monoclonal antibody manufacturing. And then in our other business, handling pharmaceutical ingredients, dry powders, we started understanding that in the upstream process with media, and then also some buffer powders, that there was a huge opportunity to jump in with a single-use product just for handling the dry powders media for powder charging, for hydration and so forth, and then buffers. So we came up with a product derivative, we took it to market, and it's growing about 30% per year. So that's how we jumped in. The typical thing, our first shot was a failure, and our second one is pretty darn good.
Scott, before you pass the mic over, I'm a journalist, so I love disaster stories. Why do you think that your first attempt, so to speak, of entering the single-use space back in 2002, 2003 failed? Was the market just not ready for that, or was the technology not recognized by industry?
Yeah, I think there were probably two things. First of all, our company has really identified, particularly as we go back to 2002, 2003 with defense contracting and manufacturing for the space industry. We manufacture the spacesuit for NASA. We still hold the contract today, and we hold the contract for the mission to Mars in 2030. So we were jumping into something that was new, that they didn't understand scalability. And so we came up with a great product, but to scale it was economically unfeasible. So we could build a great 10-liter bioreactor, but who wants that? So I think it was mostly from the standpoint that we didn't understand the biofarm industry because of our space and defense background, and we didn't understand scalability.
I'll try and give you a positive spin. You're a pioneer at least. David, Lonza, obviously in the presentation I mentioned how Lonza was one of the early entrants into biomanufacturing as a CDMO. But when did Lonza really start looking at single use?
I think it's going to have to depend on which part of Lonza now today you speak of. Our Hayward facility was doing single use processing back in the early 2000s. Again, size limitations, I think, took some impact. But they were making clinical materials, and that's still what our Hayward facility does. We've now gotten into commercial use of single-use materials, particularly in our Singapore plant. And so we've advanced quite a bit, and we're developing a facility in our Visp, Switzerland plant for clinical manufacturing that's entirely based on single use. And I can take one more detour. My background is actually from the drug delivery side of our company, and so I grew up in Bend Research. We do a lot of spray drying, and actually with the help of ILC Dover have developed a single-use spray dryer, so we can spray dry things like vaccines and highly potents, and for all the reasons given, can then just dispose of that spray dryer.
That was you.
You've kind of preempted one of my questions there, David, about the advent of single use within biomanufacturing compared to, well, I guess other industries, but small molecule manufacturing. This industry is notoriously slow at adopting new technologies. Are we behind the times when it comes to biologics manufacturing? When it comes to biomanufacturing compared to, I guess, other industries and small molecules specifically?
Yeah, I guess I would take it from a not just small molecules, but other industries as a whole. You know, if you look at if you take continuous processing, which I presented on as a baseline, you know, the oil industry, refining industry has been doing continuous processing for 75 years or some number like that. So I think the nature of our industry is that we're putting these molecules into humans, and so safety has to be taken into account up front. And that just slows us down, makes us a little more conservative. But I think you know, we're rapidly adopting it in the appropriate places. And I think single use now for clinical manufacturing, single use for containment, yeah, we're getting there.
Who's really been driving single use within this industry? Is it like a lot of vendors and CMOs want to say the end users, or is it actually the sort of service side of the industry?
Referring to small molecule?
Referring to biomanufacturing specifically, but if there's any context within small molecules, then go for it.
No, I think it's, you know, a lot of it has to do with the CDMOs and the CMOs have been driving it. That we see that's where you know, they want to be multi-use facilities. The cost of cleaning is extremely high. So the CDMOs or CMOs, larger organizations, really I think are behind driving it quite a bit, and then selling that up to the multinationals who accept it through some of the data that's out there, and some of the guidance we get from ISPE and so forth. The ISPE guidance for risk map to create a path for them to look at how to collect data and how to do good data analysis to prove that you can have a multi-use facility without cross-contamination. I think that's the big deal.
Yeah, I would agree with the multi-use facility, and I think even some of the larger pharma now are seeing that because their products are smaller volumes, that they're wanting to put more products through the same facility, through the same footprint. And so, you know, Amgen's a good example of an early adopter of single-use technology and ballroom concepts.
Are there any companies, whether end users or CMOs, who are adamantly against single use for their production needs and kind of just avoiding looking in that direction, in your opinions?
Well, you know, I think it's a two-headed argument. Whenever you get anybody asking about clinical manufacture, small volume products, fast changeover, immediately they go to single use. But there's a lot of 20,000 liter stainless steel available in the industry. The economies of scale still apply, even if it's monoclonal antibody production. So you get proponents of both. And I go to conferences that you get people from the same company arguing both sides, that stainless is the way to go because we're going to operate at 20,000 liters, and the next guy's going to say, no, we're going to run, you know, 8 2,000 liters side by side, and they have arguments for both.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the scale issue is there when there's such a large volume that they tend to still think about the integrity issues that they might perceive with single use. So I think that's quite a bit of the problem there. But again, I think that's a good point, that we know that the treatments that are being developed are more specific to particular groups of people, and so the batch sizes are going smaller, more specialized, so the need for changeover. So I think in the long run, single use will grow over the traditional stainless steel.
So really, we're not in the heyday of single use yet. We're still pushing towards full adoption by industry.
Yeah, a lot of the early arguments. Okay, so there was always the argument about, well, we're going to throw all this plastic away, so this isn't really good for the environment. It's not green. I think we've taken on all those arguments and understood that Yeah, so in some cases where you're doing cleaning and so forth, that what do you do with that water? A lot of people, particularly on the API side, have to incinerate the water. So you're burning water versus, you're burning 200 liters of water versus burning 5 kilos of plastic. What's more green? So I think as time has gone on, all of the initial arguments are being overcome one by one. I think that green argument was really front and center 10 years ago, and it's we really don't hear that argument. So it's the single use is going to continue to grow and dominate the processing area.
Yeah, and I would agree that that the stainless that's in place will continue to be used, but really a lot of the added capacity that seems to be coming out in the future is going to single-use technology.
So we're not going to see all these traditional stainless steel plants being mothballed or sold off to other industries in the future.
I don't have a crystal ball on that one.
I forgot to say at the beginning of this session, this is interactive, so if anyone does have a question either about the subject that we're discussing right at the moment or single use in general for myself or the panel, then please raise your hand and we will take it. But in the meantime, I'd like to address something that you just mentioned there, Scott, about the green issue. It's obviously in the climate today, the idea of plastic and how we deal with that situation is an issue. How is the biopharma industry, how are we dealing with the green issue? You say it's no longer such a concern as it was 10 years ago, but we must have a way of disposing these plastic bags and plastic components.
Yeah, that's something I don't really have an answer for. It's, my experience has been over the last 5 years that the question isn't really asked as much as it was asked before. So my assumption would be that the traditional landfill and or incineration processes must be used to dispose of the single-use products. You have the issue around recycling of what was it in contact. Can we take it from the biofarm facility and transport it to a recycling area safely? Is there something that would pose a risk to transportation and the environment? But the question's gone away, so never really studied to see, well, what is happening?
It's been swept under the rug, so to speak.
Maybe somebody in the audience knows better than I do, but yeah, that sounds like it's, just not a question being asked, swept under the rug.
Does Lonza have a policy when it comes to disposing single-use components?
I'm sure we have a policy. I have no idea what it is.
Something I mentioned in my presentation was the cost of these units, and industry's all very mysterious from my mind on how the cost differs between single-use and stainless steel. The single-use vendors often portray the reduced cleaning costs and operational costs when it comes to single-use. But I'm wondering if you guys, from your experience, can kind of give us a bit more insight into how customers weigh up the price difference of single-use and stainless steel.
So it really gets to be not an apples to apples comparison. It's really an analysis of the value proposition of using single-use technology, because again, you're replacing a consumables cost that might be a line item on the P&L versus facility costs of cleaning and WFI and that type of thing. But the equation gets to be a little bit more complicated when you look at it. We know facilities that the cadence of their manufacturing don't allow for them to use, let's say, stainless steel bins to transfer powder from their dispensing areas to charging into their hydration tanks. They would just need so many bins and so many and a big washing area as well to keep up the cadence. So the plant production is limited based on having to deal with the stainless steel. So it's a complicated calculation, I think, when you really look at it, and it goes to those things that are much greater than, well, how many how many single-use bags does it take to equal the cost of a stainless steel IBC? It's a much more comprehensive calculation that has to take in the whole value proposition.
And Lonza, obviously, you have both capabilities and quite a lot on both the single use and the stainless steel front. How do you feel? How do you see your customers debate which works best for them when it comes to sort of price, or is price not really an issue?
I don't think price is really an issue. When we use single use, it's primarily in the clinical setting, and so we're just producing a batch of protein at a quoted cost, and so most our clients don't think too hard about that.
But your quoted price is obviously dependent on the technologies and the systems that are being used.
Not, that's more of a scale thing.
Oops. And I guess that takes us back to the a whole CMOs going into the industry and single use being an enabler. Without single use in an imaginary world, do you think there would be so much competition for the likes of Lonza and Boehringer or Ingelheim? It's hard to imagine a world without single use, but how much has single use pushed the outsourcing industry?
I think that it's lowered the barrier to entry. That somebody can really come in and set up a shop, and if they only make 4 batches of protein a year, well, they buy 4 bags, as opposed to having to put up a stainless operation. So I think that's when you see a lot of these smaller companies that are producing clinical trial materials. Once you get the GMP floor space in place, set it up in a ballroom configuration, running as a single-use facility for clinical and small commercial products is quite viable.
But does that not work the other way for an end user to ignore the outsourcing side of things and set up their own small facility, because the flexibility single use comes that they can look to in-house rather than outsourcing companies?
I know that goes on. That is what has been in-housed, is some of the clinical trial materials for reliability reasons, and that's how Lonza are marketing ourselves through our IBEX offering, as we've got it all in place. We've already got the suites built, so it's not an 18-month to 2-year lead for you to develop your own space, that we can put a process in place right now.
Scott, any thoughts?
Yeah, we see, not only the single-use products that allow the barrier to entry to be lowered quite a bit. You're seeing the suites themselves, these pods that are being built and what have you. So you're looking at governmental control in places like Latin America, where the governments don't want to bring in manufacturing companies that are going to export the profits and so forth. So now, using single-use products, the ballroom concept, using pods, it's just lowered the entire entry to be able to come in and have local manufacturing, even supported by some of these governments, so that they can make the treatments for their population and keep the profits in country.
I would just highlight, I guess, an example of Just Therapeutics, whose goal is a bunch of legacy Amgen Seattle guys that went together, and they started a company that was all around how do you provide biotherapeutics to developing nations for reasonable costs, and their entire thinking is around pods, ballroom concept, and disposables.
So really, single use can open up these new markets then. China's an interesting one. There's been, the Chinese market has opened up from a contract manufacturing point of view, but every time I'm covering the industry there, it's all single use. It's Beijing, Boehringer Ingelheim, JHL, I think Lonza as well has invested in manufacturing capabilities in China, and it's all single use. Is that just because of all the arguments we've talked about and the ease of access and the overcoming barriers to entry, or has China just embraced it for other reasons?
Yeah, I think specifically the issue in China is they do everything fast, and they can do everything pretty well quickly. You take a look at how they build up the infrastructure, and so when you look at biopharm manufacturing like Beijing, that they have massive goals of where they're going to be at in the next 2 to 3 years. You're not going to get there with building fixed facilities with stainless steel and even with the manufacturing capabilities in China versus going with single-use products. So I think just as a culture, they accelerate everything, maybe much better than the rest of the world, with their expectation to be in full production of large manufacturing lines within a short period of time.
Are there issues in developing nations like China with access to utilities or clean water for cleaning, which makes single use a huge advantage in these situations?
Yeah, when we first started looking at the China market and looking at bringing single use into the China market, we found that should be a driver. Didn't get any total credible evidence about being able to have an ample supply of water, quality water, clean water, the cleaning process. We did find that China has a very high cost of water and cleaning water, and so but it seems clear with Wuxi and with Boehringer Ingelheim, they can overcome that problem, and so it shouldn't be an issue. But again, if you're using single use, you're not putting on all of the extra capability to make WFI so that you can do all of this cleaning and so forth. So I think that could be driving it a little bit, but I don't have specific evidence to that.
I want to talk quickly about new modalities, cell therapies, gene therapies, mRNA even. Is single use helping drive these towards commercialization in any sense?
We hope so. We hope so. I think the challenge with cell and gene therapy and CAR T and so forth is at the early stages there's a really big focus on the risk of these in vivo processes, and so I think in the early stages they're somewhat staying away from single-use technologies, but it's being discussed. I think that scalability is going to be, a fairly big problem as they look at, an analogous process where they're not talking about millions of patients, they're talking about hundreds or maybe thousands of patients in a treatment. So, I think that first, it has to be developed a little bit more to take care of this issue of how do we make sure we don't contaminate these materials and put them back in the patient's body. So that's a big thing. And it seems like a huge focus is on logistics right now. So maybe they just haven't got to the part of how do we apply single-use technology. But it would seem sure in the next 5 years that scalability will require some type of implementation of single-use technology.
Yeah, I would just add to that even in our development work in cell therapies, we're using single-use equipment.
I think what you say about the cross-contamination risk of when you're looking at taking a patient's own cells and delivering them back, single-use must really just take away any real fears of any disasters that happen there, right?
Can't say for sure yet because I'm not familiar with too many companies that have implemented single use on these CGT processes yet, but it sounds like from Dave it's coming. They're already doing it.
Yeah, early stage, small scale.
And I guess when you look at Catalent announced last week that it's buying Paragon and Thermo Fisher buying Brammer, 2 gene therapy companies, and both Thermo Fisher and Catalent have been very much advocates of single use over the last few years. There must be some sort of connection between the technologies and the modalities there.
Yes, I would agree with you.
I guess finally, I want to pull up something that I mentioned in my presentation, and David actually referred to in his, but kind of from the opposite sides. So Thermo Fisher buying Patheon, entering the CDMO space. We've got a vendor, bioprocess vendor, moving into the manufacturing space. Lonza specifically here, seeing how you're a well-established contract manufacturer and then adding technology such as the mass technology. I'm wondering, first of all, are there any other sort of CMOs that cross that boundary into having their own technology systems as well, or is this unique to Lonza? And secondly, if you see any sort of examples like of vendors and manufacturers crossing over one way or the other in the future?
Yeah, with respect to the mass system, that was, I'll just say, it was something that was developed when we were Bend Research, and we held it as basically a self-contained technology group. So that's a little bit by accident, and I think it's even more fortuitous that being acquired ultimately by Lonza, that somebody who's a world-class manufacturer of biotherapeutics now has kind of the leading auto-sampling technology is quite good. But I think that's a little bit unique. We have within Lonza, a group that is a products-focused group called our Bioscience Solutions Group. And so we have products within that group, and that mimics a little bit what the old Life Technologies, now acquired by Thermo. They're also a products company. So I think as these companies grow, having an appropriate balance of services, manufacturing services, and products leads to I think a healthier company.
And Scott, what are your thoughts on of vendor manufacturing crossover?
Just looking at the merger and acquisitions that have been going on and how Lonza has been expanding into all aspects, Thermo Fisher, Danaher, it just seems logical that the progression to sort of be comprehensive in both providing products and services and technologies is out there. They have the wherewithal to do it, and with the unlimited amount of merger and acquisition, it would seem like it's going to happen.
And so when shall we see ILC Dover manufacturing a drug substance?
Yeah, I think we'll stick to the single-use part. We like that part.
On that note, I would like once again to invite any questions from the audience on any subject. There's a question down there. We don't have a mic. If you want to shout it. So let me just say that over the microphone. I think that was, are there any comments from the panelists on the supply chain for single-use bags and materials? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the supply chain really is critical to the perpetuation of being able to not have upsets in the manufacturing process. So, we look at it in a couple of different ways. We look at it from the simple logistics of getting a finished product out to the end user. We look at it as our raw materials coming into us, and we also look at it as from a quality standpoint and being able to achieve that consistent level of quality from batch to batch to batch. And this is where we became very interested in the biopharm space, because we have the background of working in the NASA environment and documentation, SOPs, and being able to show that since, in our case, since 1969, when the first man walked on the moon, till what goes on in the International Space Station now, we deliver that product over and over and over again. So I think supply chain risks and supply chain management has to be a robust part of any single-use supplier to support the end users the right way.
And David? No? Did that answer your question? Are there any more questions? Well, in that case, I would just like to thank our panelists once again, Scott Patterson and David Lyon. And yeah, thank you all for joining us this morning. Yeah, thanks.